Let me take you back to the beginning of a new millennium. The Y2K scare had just passed, sun was shining, kids played outside, the internet was just getting started, and almost every genre of music dominated the charts, everything feeling so colorful and lively. In cinemas, you could watch The Philosopher's Stone, Shrek, or The Lord of the Rings back to back, and the family-friendly superhero genre, despite being in its infancy, was in full swing with Spider-Man.
Go, Web! Go! Go! Go, Web, go!
However, in 2003, Marvel decided to break the mold, hiring another indie filmmaker to make something different, darker, and visceral, that general audiences weren't quite ready for. When Bruce Banner, a genetic researcher whose past remains clouded in mystery, is involved in a horrifying gamma radiation accident, he slowly realizes that he unwillingly transforms into the Hulk, a monster fueled by his pent-up trauma and rage. With the help of his old flame Betty, Bruce searches for answers on his newfound curse, reluctantly unraveling his childhood abuse and confronting the man behind it all, his father David, who intends to continue experimenting on Bruce with sinister intentions. All the while, the military led by Betty's father, General Ross, and former colleague Glenn Talbot seek to harness Bruce's abilities, regardless of his survival. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you Hulk is perfect, however, it does so much right that simply cannot be ignored. The plot is broken down in a 4-act structure, starting with the over 10-minute prologue embracing the golden rule of show don't tell, informing the audience of its dark tone, themes, pace, and unique editing style, which I'll get more into later. This snappier method of exposition helps keep the runtime concise, as opposed to a traditionally cut sequence followed by an ellipsis. I am going to praise a massive amount of this film. However, we've already run into the culprit of Hulk's main narrative issue, the walking contrivance known as David Banner. Bruce Banner, despite being the protagonist, is a passive character, meaning the plot nudges him in a direction and he follows. Ideally, it should be the other way around. In opposition, his father David is our main driving force, usually not an issue, although when every major narrative push comes from contrivance, the impact of said elements holds less weight when you stop to think about it. Let's break it down. When David is confronted by General Ross after discovering he broke protocol by testing on human subjects, he's off the program, yet isn't immediately handcuffed, taken into custody, or under any surveillance, roaming freely around the base with access keys. And guess what happens?
0.
This singular event drives the entire plot, and oh boy, it gets worse. After the 30-year time jump, David Banner, a man who single-handedly blew up an important military base, is out of prison with zero supervision and manages to get a janitorial job at the lab where General Ross's daughter, who was on the base during said explosion, currently works. This job not only permits him to get closer to his son, which leads him to creating the Hulk dogs we see later, but also activating his own powers. On top of this, it's said that he's only been out of prison for a month, but has a property. Did it belong to the old janitor? The film does imply David killed him, so I guess he coincidentally had no family that would notice.
This is a load of barnacles.
The movie equally implies that David messing around and stealing lab equipment is what leads to Bruce's gamma exposure, since we see the former's home filled with expensive parts of hardware used by the latter. Which begs the question, are there no cameras in this building filled with state-of-the-art science gear?
Well, that's just lazy writing.
And please, don't rush to the comments saying Stan Lee and Lou Ferrigno's cameo justifies this gaping lack of security on the premises. In the director's commentary, Ang Lee explicitly states they told Lee to improvise his line.
Good morning, Dr. Krensler. Security ought to be beefed up a lot more in a place like this.
Who knew Ferrigno would be such a bad security guard? The reason I'm being so harsh is because these are major narrative drivers rooted in contrivances which could have been at the very least solved with a couple lines of dialogue or rearranging certain scenes. Now, on to the positives.
Ready?
The film manages to keep audiences hooked with its incredible use of conflict, both internal and external, on most of its key players. For now, I'll be talking about the latter. The script's strongest aspect stems from the ideological clash between Glenn and Ross against both generations of Banners. Firstly, let's tackle Glenn and Bruce. Bruce's disdain towards Talbot starts out of jealousy due to his failed relationship with Betty, dumping him as a consequence of his emotional distance due to his unresolved trauma. Glenn swooping in to rebound.
Looking good.
Their turmoil bleeds into Bruce's work as Glenn plans a hostile takeover, wanting to privatize Banner's nanomed formula, whilst Bruce prefers using it to help others. Simple, but it works, although Talbot resembles more a plot device rather than a character, functioning more so as an extension of Ross. Secondly, we have General Ross and Bruce. Thaddeus Ross's vilification of Bruce derives from his hatred of David, not being able to see past the sins committed by the father, passing them on to his son.
Why is he such a threat to you?
Because I know what he comes from. He is his father's son.
Predestined to follow in his father's footsteps.
I was gonna say damned.
This hatred is accentuated by Banner now being able to turn into Hulk, a walking manifestation of General Ross's biggest career failure 30 years prior.
I had David Banner locked up and sent that kid away. I didn't give that boy a second thought. He was just collateral damage.
Furthermore, with Hulk now into the fold, Thaddeus's core is challenged, the former a personification of chaos whilst Ross is one of control. This is where the film wears its inspirations on its sleeve, channeling Frankenstein, a beast who wanted nothing more but peace, whose life is constantly upheaved by those threatened by his mere existence. Several times, the story takes cues from Mary Shelley's work in particular, so do look out for those on a rewatch. Lastly, Hulk's main external conflict is carried by David and Bruce. As Ross mentioned, Bruce unknowingly continues in David's footsteps with genetic research, howbeit not in the same way. David's work was about preventing damage to the body, whilst Bruce's focus was directed towards repairing it. The previous echoing destiny in Greek mythology, trying to avoid it, inadvertently manifesting it. The subsequent, a reflection of Bruce's broken psyche subconsciously wanting to be fixed by his research.
Of course, you're my flesh and blood. But then you're something else, too. My physical son. But the child of my mind, too.
This ideological dispute culminates in a physical David versus Goliath battle, the father's character coming full circle, once again trying to kill his son, however not out of love or mercy, but out of hatred for the lost life he represents. Bruce is a child unaccepting of his father's sacrifice, rejecting his gift of pure power and freedom. Too bad the epic finale is shrouded in fucking darkness! It's not as bad as The Long Night, but my god man, couldn't the moon have been a bit brighter? And like anything in the early 2000s, it's truly a death sentence to people with epilepsy. In the same way Spider-Man truly is a Sam Raimi film, 2003's Hulk is Ang Lee's brainchild, bringing to the forefront what he knows best, drama through finding meaning in life, broken familial ties, emotional repression, and catharsis through release of said repression. These thematic elements are constantly present throughout the film, turning what would be a larger-than-life story into a much more intimate venture. Crazily enough, this film was never test screened, which is virtually unheard of for a $137 million budget blockbuster, which goes to show the studio had full confidence in Lee's vision.
Involving everything, be personal, attending every aspect of it down to the very last detail is the only way I know how to make a movie. If I cannot personally attend, then I shouldn't do the movie. All the elements have to be in one movie, one vision.
Lee manages to reel in the viewer from the get-go through his top-notch usage of dread, paranoia, and fear, only using anger as a catalyst to Banner's transformation. Hulk's first appearance occurs around 40 minutes into the film, Lee slowly building a sense of uneasiness for the audience, reflected by others, finally landing on Bruce. This all starts with David's first interaction with Betty, amplified by his demeanor, a shadow lurking in plain sight.
Hey, what happened to Benny?
Benny's dead. I'm the new guy.
Good to meet you.
Same.
The paranoia expands to Bruce as he encounters the dogs whilst leaving the lab, eventually seeing them and David's shadow outside his window after a terrifying nightmare. Lee somehow manages to capture the sporadic nature of dreams, with fear instead of rage being pushed to the forefront, as the former is a much more intimate emotion which allows the audience to connect even more with Bruce's psychosis. On top of all this, there's the added pressure from work after an important test's failure, and Glenn's advances towards Betty. All of the above results in a mental breakdown, flames fanned by Betty's call concerning Glenn's takeover of the lab, the final touch of anger, our ultimate catalyst. The film manages to keep that built-up sense of dread even after Hulk's first appearance, through its usage of lighting and of course the actors' performances. If you pay close attention, you'll see that subsequent scenes with Bruce are shot with his face at times half-shadowed, paralleling what was done with David's return after the ellipsis, a subtle way of letting the audience know he can Hulk out anytime. Another aspect of the film that boasts Lee's talents are the fight scenes. Lee is no stranger to action, delivering one of the best modern wuxia films to date with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, bringing those sensibilities to Hulk, the dogfight in particular being the most brutal of the film, where the Green Giant truly goes all out. He manages to add extra layers to the fight by way of multiple attack styles within enemies and having to protect Betty whilst in the foresty environment. Every single one of Hulk's punches carry weight, but so do the dog's bites, finishing the fight limping and out of breath despite informing the viewer of how incredible he is, growing in size and strength the angrier he gets. Lee manages to have the audience empathize with Hulk over his struggle and pain to protect the one he loves. A final thing the film does incredibly well, which I'll expand on when breaking down the editing, is its usage of character POVs. Just as a reminder, when an event happens in a film, a big part of the audience's sentiments come from seeing the on-screen reactions of those in the scene. If an emotional event goes down but our characters involved don't care, then why would the audience? That's the gist of it. It seems simple enough, but modern streaming slop even forgets the basics nowadays, which is appalling. This brings me to Bruce's lab accident, a sequence that snowballs tension in such little time, but when we reach the payoff, it's over in a flash. The true weight of that sequence is really put in perspective for audiences when Betty visits him in the following scene.
Get out!
You should be dead. They've killed everything else that they've come into contact with. You were gonna die, and I was gonna have to watch you die.
You should get some rest.
Hulk, of course, isn't the first to do this, but it is quite rare to see on screen, so here's another example of this type of scene succession. Before moving on, I would like to address one final issue the film presents. The reasoning as to how Bruce turns into the Hulk isn't always respected. Initially, you'd think like in the comics, Hulk comes out whenever Bruce's rage has boiled over. However, this film presents a different explanation. Physical pain is required to activate the nanomeds, which have been in Bruce's body from birth, and when these start repairing a wound, they in turn activate the Hulk genome, transforming him. This is of course post-gamma radiation accident. It's quite a fantastic narrative tool as it plays on Bruce's mental anguish causing him so much pain it physically hurts. This is a real phenomenon called psychogenic pain, and building on this shows the audience the true horror of Bruce's newfound reality. As long as Bruce can't get rid of his mental trauma, he'll never be in control of transforming, hurting anyone close to him simply by suffering from a nightmare or breakdown at any time.
A physical wound is finite, but with emotions, what's to say that it won't just go on and on?
Said lack of control highlights Bruce's damnation of living a solitary life, putting into perspective one of the best lines we've seen from an on-screen portrayal of Hulk in The Avengers.
I didn't see an end, so I put a bullet in my mouth and the other guy spit it out.
Herein lies the issue. The film sort of decides when it wants this idea to work. Hulk transforms a total of 4 times on screen, with one tease at the end. All 4 transformations stemming from mental anguish manifesting physically or straight up physical pain by being punched and electrocuted. However, in other scenes where Bruce is physically hurt, he doesn't become the Hulk. This isn't a major issue, although the film should have kept this aspect consistent. Hey, wait, does that mean if Bruce gets a paper cut, he can accidentally... When it comes to our characters, Glenn is by far the weakest, relegated by the plot to do Ross's dirty work. It's as if the writers realized that if Ross personally beats Bruce around, then Betty would never give him a chance of forgiveness, so they cooked up a generic army businessman to fill in that role. His persona remaining surface level, what you see is what you get. Despite this, Josh Lucas actually did a great job with the material provided, which I think is why Glenn is still remembered fondly. I know the film frames him as a bad guy, but man, did he really deserve to get ragdolled and blown up? Sam Elliott dominates the screen as Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, which I have to say is one of the coolest fucking names for a fictional military general ever. His tactical and combat experience is highlighted at every turn, proving to the audience that he's earned his position, a true representation of leadership and control.
Contamination, sir. System readings are redline.
Shut down all power to the main hall. Show him the way out. We'll fight him outside.
His fruitful career, however, came at a cost. The relationship with his daughter Betty, whom he retains dominance over not as a father, but as a high-ranking official. Ross and Betty's relationship is at first purely transactional, as seen during their first meetup. Thaddeus only calling his daughter when he needed insight on her work, paralleling Betty's need to call him as well, utilizing his status to push out Glenn's takeover of the lab.
About Glenn,
There's nothing to talk about.
I just wanted to say, don't worry about him. I'll handle it. I'm gonna call my father.
Last I heard, you and your father weren't speaking.
Guess now I have something to talk with him about.
A few moments later.
Hi, Dad.
Hello, Betty.
Look, I'm gonna get right to it.
It's about Glenn, isn't it?
I noticed some things. Asked me to make some inquiries.
I think I was hoping that maybe this time you just honestly wanted to see me again.
Ross's internal turmoil is heightened when Bruce becomes the Hulk, having to tread a fine line between Betty's pleas to save Banner and doing his job. Ultimately, he acknowledges Bruce's merits after the dog attack, strengthening his bond with Betty, still trying to put her to the forefront whenever possible, even though duty calls first. Their relationship, by the end of the film, taking one leap forward.
I'm sorry, Betty. I am so sorry.
I know you are.
Jennifer Connelly is arguably the most talented actress of the cast, bringing forth some of the best subtle acting you'll see amongst the core four. I also can't deny she's drop-dead gorgeous. No wonder Bruce crashed out after they broke up. Paul Bettany, you are a very, very lucky man.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
Her internal conflict is juxtaposed with Ross's, whereas she's struggling to come to terms with her unrequited love towards Bruce, stemming from his emotional distance, reflecting the relationship with her father. When in front of Thaddeus, she can barely keep eye contact unless talking about business, only willingly calling Ross out of pure fear. This fear comes after Hulk saves her, but Bruce takes foreplay a bit too far.
Dad.
Betty, are you all right?
I'm scared. I need your help.
The film doesn't just force Betty into her father's arms. This payoff was previously built on a deep fear she brought up to Bruce a few scenes prior when mentioning a recurring nightmare, which has now come to life. Despite this, Betty's love for Bruce remains strong, the only source of warmth and beauty in Banner's broken world, his North Star, managing to guide him back to reality when he was too far gone, in face of all the destruction.
You found me.
You weren't that hard to find.
Yes, I was.
Now, onto my favorite walking contrivance, David Banner. David abuses his son basically from birth, struggling with the duality of seeing Bruce as his son or an experiment, even though the film exhibits multiple instances that he has his son's best interest in mind. This switch flips when Hulk saves Betty from David's dogs, solidifying Bruce as an ungrateful failure in his eyes. David always believes he's doing the right thing, with the film actually making you care for his struggles. He's a man whose hubris lost him everything, except his son, who, in his eyes, as I said previously, betrays him.
I remember that day so well, walking into the house, the feeling of the handle of the knife in my hand, fulfilling a father's mercy. But then she surprised me. It was as if she and the knife merged. You cannot imagine the unbearable finality of it.
One eternity later.
I didn't come here to see you. I came here to see my son. Stop your bawling. You weak little speck of human trash.
His god complex eventually leads to his demise, finally understanding and cracking under the weight of trauma and rage inflicted onto his son. Nick Nolte was an absolute powerhouse in this film, boasting so much gravitas he could turn even the cheesiest of dialogue into a threat, his presence sometimes overshadowing the best cast members I mentioned prior. Fun fact, this film actually contributed to Nolte's DUI mugshot infamy, as he wasn't grooming whilst growing his hair out for the role.
Say cheese. Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
Last but not least, our mild-mannered scientist and green giant himself, Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk. I have to preface this by saying, Eric Bana is a good and at times great actor, but man, his performance in Hulk can range from, whoa, he's acting his ass off, to...
Then why are you asking me? I don't remember. I was always told my father was dead.
I must have seen you, or known you. If only I could remember.
To cut Banner some slack, I think it might be a mix of his American accent not being on point coupled with the cheesy dialogue. This was only his first big American movie. He had worked on prior stuff in Australia back then, but he was using his native accent. However, it's still not as bad as Keanu Reeves' British one in Dracula.
I doubted everything, even my mind. I know where the bastard sleeps. I brought him down.
Now, when it comes to Bruce's character, the film establishes him from the get-go as someone who is pushed around without any will to fight back, bottling his emotions. Despite this, the film instills within him the core heroic value of self-sacrifice, as seen during the lab accident, saving Harper at what would have been the cost of his life. This dichotomy between Bruce and Hulk comes from the former's lack of fighting spirit. Keep in mind, Banner's repressed memories and trauma are the only reality Hulk knows, taking that burden and harnessing it into raw physical strength, something that Banner cannot or will not do. Because of this, in Hulk's eyes, Banner is spineless, and he doesn't shy away from letting him know when they meet face to face.
Puny human.
There's only one scene in which Bruce consciously decides to face his trauma, opening the same door that unleashed his inner monster, this time of his own accord. The entire sequence is brilliantly shot with natural light, using shadows to highlight how haunting the events of that day were for a small, terrified Bruce. The key word here is small. The picture on multiple occasions contrasts Hulk with our world. By this, I mean Hulk, in spite of being a literal massive presence, is presented as a tiny figure in comparison to the landscape. This sentiment is complemented by the cinematography, which I'll mention later. But the effects of this contrast allows the audience to connect with him. I'm sure we've all had those days where we wish nothing more than for it to just be over. You know, relationship struggles, financial struggles, you feel alone and helpless. So you just lay back and put your struggles into perspective.
Life makes no sense. You're on a planet right now. You're on a space rock floating in nothingness, infinite nothingness, and the infinite nothingness is expanding. That makes no fucking sense.
Bruce's journey in this film comes to a close as he kills his father, who had turned himself into a physical manifestation of his accumulated trauma. Bruce now relegating himself to a semi-peaceful life in the jungle to escape the military, all the while helping those in need. As aforementioned, the viewer still needs to somehow connect with our Green Giant. On the one hand, that is done through Hulk's simple character design, and on the other, through his movements, more specifically his physical actions and struggle to accomplish said actions. Hulk isn't precise with his movements. He slips, stumbles, and even limps away. This attaches an unchoreographed element to his movements that ground him in reality. Finally, the film doesn't shy away from showing us Hulk's combat effectiveness, making him a much more dangerous threat to the military than just a raging beast, able to assess a situation and make decisions on the fly to optimize his destruction. Also, this film is rated PG-13, but my god does Hulk kill a lot of people who were literally just doing their jobs, protecting the city from a 15-foot, 1.5-ton monster.
Give me a head count.
2003's Hulk doesn't exactly boast a happy ending for our main characters. Quite the opposite. It truly ends as a tragedy. Bruce lives a solitary life cursed with Hulk, always on the run. Betty's love remains unrequited. Glenn suffers from an unceremonious death, and General Ross still has to deal with chasing his daughter's lover, despite their relationship starting to mend. Hulk ultimately serves as a reflection of our everyday life in society. We all have a Hulk inside us, but we control it. We decide when we release it and what to do when it's released. It's a feeling we can all share.
I don't know if you've noticed or not, but there's other people waiting to use the phone here. You know what? What?
Hulk's incredibly memorable 18-track score composed by Danny Elfman shines throughout the 138-minute runtime, paying homage to classic horror composers, in particular Bernard Herrmann. Fascinatingly, composer Michael Dana was initially hired for the feature, although his work was rejected by Universal, citing it as unsuitable for the film's tone. He ultimately reunited with Ang Lee on Life of Pi a decade later, winning him the Oscar for Best Original Score.
Excuse me, that was my moment, my fate.
You're welcome.
Composed by Elfman in 37 days under close supervision by Lee, the string and percussion-heavy score with added horns manages to capture the rage-fueled yet calm nature of the Hulk, serving the story rather than being a mindless add-on. This is best shown in the near 8-minute opus entitled A Man Again, assembling all elements of the prior 13 tracks, perfectly blending established leitmotifs from multiple characters and important scenes, acting as the emotional core track of the picture. It's an auditory manifestation of Bruce's journey until that point in the film. This mirroring technique is also used in what is the most recognized song of Hulk, Main Titles, an operatic reflection of Bruce's transformation as the Hulk in 4 parts: meditation, paranoia, rage, and finally, peace. The Hulk's main leitmotif being reused in several character-specific tracks equally accentuates how each person contains a dark side. Concerning the aforementioned leitmotifs, here are some examples to look for in a re-listen. Betty's tracks have a distinct vocal chant akin to Ridley Scott's Gladiator. General Ross, of course, horn-heavy army fanfare, and David Banner is represented by a more electronic and chaotic-inspired riff. Despite the incredible usage of score, the film knows when to restrain itself, leaving a lot of the poignant and contemplative scenes devoid of music with minimal sound effects. This not only puts forward the cast's fantastic performances, but also highlights Hulk's freedom. It's Banner's physical catharsis over mental anguish through the beast. It's the blessed side of his curse.
It was like a dream. Rage. Power. Freedom.
Ang Lee consistently pushing Elfman out of his comfort zone whilst being very hands-on the process delivered something that truly stood out from his prior work at the time, despite remaining in the same film genre he'd been working on for decades. In addition, the film also contains an original song titled Set Me Free by Velvet Revolver that plays over the end credits, being in large part used for the film's promo, and hey, it's actually pretty good.
What was the biggest challenge of this?
Bring Hulk alive.
To make him what? Make him
humanized.
Humanized.
Yeah.
In other words, create somebody that somebody
you can
could
identify with as a human being.
who was as big and large and as powerful and as invulnerable as he was.
Yeah. That's the hardest thing for animator to do, to bring continuity and the
how
performance.
did you do that? By what?
Despite an emotional and convincing on-screen portrayal, I'm terribly sorry to inform you all that Hulk is not a real person. Created over the course of 2.5 years by ILM, the Emerald Giant was, at the time, the most difficult fully CG creature they had worked on due to its close proximity with human anatomy and expressions, unlike Dobby, whom had been a massive but easier undertaking. ILM handcrafted over 1,165 muscle shapes and around 13,000 map textures for his skin alone to bring into life.
We were able to create a human creature, an organic creature with skin, with hair, with eyes, with tears, with sweat.
Hulk, whose mocap performances were done by Ang Lee himself, as aforementioned, delivered sloppy, more realistic movements to humanize the character. They knew from the get-go that Hulk's CGI and expressive face in particular would ultimately make or break the picture, with it of course relying heavily on the audience connecting with this giant, muscular, chiseled, strong, fearsome, Greek god-looking behemoth.
You know what? You are one tall glass of water, and I'm telling you straight up, I'm thirsty.
Oh, where were we? The Jade Goliath's performance was not only sold by his naturalistic look, but the level of detail given to his interrelation with our world, from the added environmental CG elements to the other actors interacting with him. In addition to the Hulk himself, the movie's CGI holds up remarkably well, with the exception of this one bloody shot. The CGI holding up is in large part due to the immense practical work having virtually everything Hulk touches be real, destroying entire sets to simulate his presence. The final aspect that sells his realism is the persistent sense of scale, the film hammering this point by having a continual frame of reference, whether it be other characters, a car, trees, and of course the military equipment used against him in the same shot.
I'm passing flight level 600. This is out of my envelope.
On the cinematography side, Frederick Elms, frequent collaborator of David Lynch and Jim Jarmusch, brought in his art house sensibilities, deliberately prioritizing close-up shots to accentuate that feeling of a more personal film, despite its scope, with the wide shots used solely when enforcing the sense of scale I mentioned earlier, Hulk being a massive beast turned small in a bigger world. The combination of Lee's direction and Elms' framing ultimately lends a dreamlike feel to the picture, which complements the film's script, but also pays homage to horror films of old that inspired Ang Lee's vision. The beauty that can be found within terror. The final aspect augmenting this dreamlike horror feel is the set design, each one distinct due to the color palette utilized. The last thing I'd like to touch on is what people mainly remember 2003's Hulk for. Editing. This could have easily been a 3-hour picture. However, due to its usage of what they dubbed a multi-image unit that lays out multiple POVs in real time, it manages to retain a linear structure as well as its pace. Moreover, this dynamic editing style not only helps build tension, but also adds an extra layer of it to certain scenes, doubled down by its accordance with the score. Having multiple POVs gives the audience a clear indication of stakes, as aforementioned, due to character reactions in said situations. The second facet to this editing style is of course the tribute to comic paneling, at times using interactive borders to capture the audience's attention, a technique that's sort of become lost in mainstream comics, yet still found in manga. Even so, the comic approach never strays attention away from the medium of film, with just a handful of scenes actually feeling like a comic page.
You see, I can partake with the essences of all things.
Nice and easy.
The final characteristic of Hulk's editing are the transitions. These retain the forward momentum of the story, the viewer never having to wait on the next scene or cut because it's already there, keeping them engaged. These transitions are quite seamless, using organic shapes and designs within the scene to blend shots together, couple that with some pulpy, sometimes cheesy sound effects, and the result is a classic B-movie feel. Interestingly, the film takes its usage of transitions a step further, only employing the traditional fade to black when changes have been made in the status quo, being used a total of 5 times, so try keeping that in mind when re-watching the film to see what I mean.
All right, let's get this picture started.
Before concluding this video, I would like to address the box office failure that this film was. Despite a very strong opening, it suffered one of the worst second week drop-offs at the time for a superhero film. The reason? Marketing.
I need everything we have to stop his movement.
From director Ang Lee.
Hulk was sold as a summer blockbuster full of action at events like WWE and the Super Bowl. Instead, patrons arriving at the theater ended up sitting through a 2-hour character drama about abuse, repression, and broken relationships. Seriously, the main criticism of the time was there's ultimately too much talking and not enough smashing. Listen, I honestly do understand going into a movie expecting one thing and receiving something completely different. That is normal to be angry about. However, I would at least expect critics to rate it on its other presented merits. I am thankful though that Ebert and Roper were ahead of the curve on this one. The film currently is being reappraised by many and seen as a cult classic.
The Hulk may be a little too thoughtful and a little too character-driven to please its basic teenage action audience, but I like that about the movie. This is a surprisingly effective movie. Thumbs up.
And I'm giving it a strong thumbs up. This is a superhero movie that really captures the essence of comic book pop art.
Did I personally enjoy the film?
Was a bear shit in the woods?
Ang Lee's Hulk was a breath of fresh air, not only in comparison to today's stale superhero market, but it's one of those rare films that manages to captivate me on every viewing, making up for its glaring plot issues through masterful usage of score and editing, coupled with gripping performances by Connolly, Elliott, and Nick Nolte in particular, delivering a dark character study on a complex hero that remains unmatched to this day. So, if you're looking for something a bit different, then I highly recommend dusting off your old CD and rewatching this little gem of a bygone here.
Unleash the excitement. Unleash the power that's too big for one DVD. Just push play, and you'll be blown away. Hulk. Buy it on DVD and video today.
Thank you all for watching and sticking around this long. I hope you enjoyed the video. Do subscribe and drop a like if you did, and hopefully, I'll see you all next time.